Game with honor.
Greetings. I'm Richard. This is Heretic Knight Gaming, and I'm here today to talk to you about Warhammer 40,000 Space Marines Assault Intercessor and Paint Set. Now, why would you want to buy this? Primarily, you are thinking about getting into Warhammer 40,000, or if you're more on the fantasy side of things, maybe the Age of Sigmar equivalent set, and you want to see if this hobby's right for you. This is an excellent box to get if you're thinking about Warhammer 40,000. Even if you are not interested in playing, as they are sometimes lovingly, sometimes insultingly called, the Smurfs or the Blueberries, or the Ultramarines. Even if you're not interested in that faction, this is a good kit to start with if you are thinking about Warhammer 40,000, but you're not entirely sure. The reason being is that this is going to give you the complete experience, so to speak. You're going to have a sprue. You're going to have to cut things off of it. You're going to have to assemble the models. You're going to have to clean them up. And then, of course, it has the GW paints, the Games Workshop paints, to use to get the model painted. Now, pure personal opinion here, I personally do not think the Games Workshop paints are worth the brand premium you pay for them. That is strictly personal opinion. It is not based on any kind of research or testing or anything else like that. I just don't like the price. I'm cheap, okay? That said, there are some definite advantages of staying within the Games Workshop paint line if you are the type of person that doesn't necessarily want to stress out over what colors to put where. Games Workshop does have a lot of excellent tutorials and video references and just color references for if you want to paint the official paint scheme for this army, here are the colors that you need. They do a really good job of that. So there is an advantage of being within the GW paint line, and this will let you get a feel for their paints. Now, like I mentioned in my intro video, there are some additional things that we need. One thing that we absolutely must have, and a couple of things that are on the nice to have category. The must have, I'm sorry, there's no real negotiation on this point, is a pair of hobby snips. You need some way of getting the models off of the sprue. You need one of these to do that. Yes, technically, there are workarounds. I'm not going to talk about them because they run the risk of either damaging the models or, in more extreme cases, damaging you. Next up on the things that you should probably have, but it's not strictly necessary, would be a hobby knife. You are going to want to clean up the models. These, depending on the quality that you went with for your snips, can leave marks. Now, if you want the $60 God hands, you're fine. You're not going to have to really clean up your models. Those things cut through these plastic like butter. My little $4 Walmart set here, I'm going to need to do some cleanup. Moving further down the list of recommended nice to have, but you don't really need, would be something to sand with. Now, I'm a weirdo, and I use a metal file for my toolbox. I just had a bunch of these lying around. I need something to sand with. I'm comfortable and familiar with using these. So, why not? Most people won't. You do have to be careful with a metal file like this because this will eat plastic. So, most normal people will use sanding sticks or sandpaper to do fine detailed cleanup. But this is very optional. You won't really need this for this particular box set here. And all the way down on the bottom tier of recommended, but you don't really need it, would be plastic cement. It doesn't have to be this brand. As long as it's plastic cement, it's all the same chemical. There can be some slight variations in how thin it is and how smoothly it runs and spreads out, but other than that, it's all the same stuff. Get the cheapest stuff you can get your hands on. That is really optional for this. This is a push-fit kit. It is designed to be put together without glue. It says it on the box, no glue needed. That said, from a personal preference, I still like using this, even on push-fit models, to ensure that the pieces are not going anywhere. There's, you put a little bit too much pressure on one specific spot, you're not going to have a gap suddenly opening up and tearing your paint or anything like that. Very optional, but I still recommend it if you can easily obtain it. And of course, you're going to need a dry palette or something. Now, this does have a hard plastic sheet in it that we can use as a quasi dry palette, so no need to buy one specifically for this. And that's it. Let's see what's in the box. All right, let's get this opened up and see what we got. All right, so as it says on the tin, we have a sprue that contains all the bits for our Space Marines. This is very common on how GW products come, pretty much all GW products in the Warhammer and Age of Sigmar lines. So that has our 3 Space Marines on it. Of course, our Space Marines are going to need something to stand on, so we have 3 bases, each of them with a peg hole that we'll be able to put the models into. We have a pretty standard size brush. This is labeled as the Citadel Starter Brush. And I take it off. Oh, the camera is not focusing particularly great, but there you go. You can see the brush. It's a fairly sort of midline brush size. I don't want to get into brush sizes this video. This is a good all-arounder brush. It's gonna be a little bit lacking if you have large amounts of flat surfaces to try to cover. Like, for example, I would not want to try and paint this dragon's wings using this brush. That would not be happy fun times. Likewise, if I had a very small and very detailed model, it might not be the best brush either. For example, if I was trying to paint on the inside of this model's horns and such, this might not necessarily be the best brush for that, but it's going to handle most scenarios, and it's going to handle most scenarios decently. Finally, we have, get them out of their little tray here, the 6 advertised paints. Now, GW likes to put their paints in what are called paint pots. So called because, well, they're little pots of paint, and when you go to use them, you just sit them down, you pop open the top. Let me carefully pop open the top here. There we go. A little bit. Seal is still on it. And you set the pot down and you use it potentially straight from the pot. That's what that little lip there is for. But you can see it, it's a pot of paint. As opposed to most paint brands, which use this dropper style of paints. I personally prefer these. These are well-renowned within many painting circles of being easy to knock over, especially what's called the shade paints, like this Agrax Earth Shade, because you typically will be leaving this open while you're using it, as opposed to the regular paints where you'll just get a dollop of it on the palette and work from there. This you typically do work straight from the bottle, and it's really easy to knock over. So yeah, most people do prefer the bottles, but hey, this is what we got. Now we have, with this kit, 4 paints, a technical paint, and what's a shade. So these are paints. There's not much else to say about them. They put paint on the model. The technical paint's a little bit of an odd beast. It's less of a paint and more of a texture, almost like a paste rather than a paint. And this is provided for basing, so that instead of having a smooth, just regular old plastic base, you put technical paint on it like this to give it a lot more texture. And then finally, a shade isn't really a paint per se. It's more of it's a tinting color, basically. I mean, it's still technically a paint. It's just really, really watered down. It's like water, basically. And it's designed to tint or shade the model. And then finally, you have your dry palette. Yeah, I'm not joking. Perfectly acceptable use as a dry palette. Even without like breaking it up or anything like that. You've got these two wells, or you've got where the paints were sitting. You could flip it upside down if you wanted and use the top of it. Yeah, this legitimately, I'm not being joking here, makes for a perfectly acceptable dry palette. I would still recommend eventually getting something like this. And of course, my phone's going to go off. One moment. And that is why you silence your phones before doing something important. Okay, so yeah, dry palette, enough said. You can go ahead and end that conversation. All right, now there seems to be something missing. There's no instructions. Where's the instructions? Okay, so I am being a little bit facetious here. There are instructions. They are on the back of the box, such as they are. And they are reasonable instructions. I mean, it does do a reasonably good job here of laying out, here's all the parts associated with each marine. Here's the order in which you should put them together. This little paint guide here is of questionable use. I mean, it does point out which colors are which, but the shading and the technical paint pointers are worthless. You wouldn't know how to apply those if you didn't already know how to paint. And yeah, there's not much on the box. Now, to be fair, they do have down here in this little sequence of events of you assemble, you paint, and then you play. They do have a URL down here. And if you go to that URL and you take a few more clicks than what I personally would think is appropriate, you will get to a well put together 6-minute video on how to paint these Marines. It's nothing particularly fancy, but it does the job. Now, this may be a little bit of old man yells at clouds. I mean, I'm not that old. I am closing in on the half-century mark, but there's certainly older people than me in the hobby. But I like written instructions. It's not necessarily the most convenient to have something digital while you're trying to paint. You know, it's a lot easier to have a booklet that you're flipping through, because if you get paint on that, it doesn't really matter that much. If you're trying to use your phone while you're painting and you get paint on your phone, that's a slightly different issue. But the instructions, they are there. They are good. And they will help you get your Marines painted. Now, I'm going to split this up into a couple of different videos. So this video is just about done. You're almost free. The next video will cover cutting this out, getting it cleaned up and assembled. And then the next video will cover the actual painting process. I might combine the assembly and painting all into one video. It kind of depends on how long it goes. We'll see on that one. I've not done this before, so it's a learning experience for all of us. But that is the general plan. And when it comes to painting, I am going to do one Marine exactly as they say. I am going to do one Marine exactly as they say, but prime it black first. And then I'm going to do one Marine still just using these paints, but being a little bit more interpretive with, you know, where should I put colors and how do I want to do things. Okay. And if you enjoyed this video or found some value in it, thumbs up would be appreciated. And if you didn't like it, that's unfortunate. The thumbs down button is right next to it. Until next time.